Todd Leonard is in studio. He has a new book and a book signing coming up. More details on that again coming up as we continue our conversation. Before I take you back 20 years to the beginning of your trips to Japan, are there any misconceptions, I'm sure there are, between the peoples? We talk about how, whether it be the internet or travel is so convenient these days, the world has gotten smaller. It's not that small. What misconceptions do you see as you go between home in Japan and home in Shelbyville that people just can't shake or don't understand?
Right. Well, you know, it has changed a lot since I started living in Japan 20 years ago. I remember when I first started living in Japan, so many people, when I'd come home, would say, well, how do you like China? And I would say, well, I haven't been. I don't know. But I think that's a common misconception because if you haven't traveled or don't have an experience outside of the country, you tend to group a type of people together. I know that Canadians get very agitated when people consider them Americans, and they say, well, I'm a North American. I'm not American, but I'm North American. So it's similar. But that doesn't happen so much anymore. I think that more people are so aware of the global community with the news and the internet, like you said, and how the mass media has just changed. I didn't have email when I first went to Japan, and depended on writing letters, because telephoning home was so expensive at that time. Now I have a Magic Jack, and I can call just at the drop of a hat. So, and the same thing with internet. I can't imagine life before internet. It's hard to remember.
Anymore.
Yeah, it really is. But before then, it was just a whole different ball game that we had to deal with. But as far as the people are concerned, there are stereotypes, of course, in every culture that have some type of truth to them. And I think in general, I find, in my experience, Japanese people to be very polite, very humble. And I think that is a type of stereotype that most people have of Japan. One stereotype that I think is probably not true is how studious Japanese students are. Perhaps in the past they were, but having taught university for 20 years in Japan, I found that that's changed quite a bit too. People here still have this idea that Japanese students are very good test takers, which they are, but they are very motivated. And that is true through high school. But it seems as though once students graduate from high school and get accepted into university, it's kind of a 4-year, well, I don't want to say party, but relaxation type of attitude.
Those college kids are the same
everywhere. Except in Japan, it's a lot harder to flunk out of university, whereas here, if you don't keep your GPA up, you're out. So there, it's more pass-fail system. So a grade point average doesn't really come into effect at all. So students can take a class several times, and not because they can't do the work. Usually it's because they're lazy. It's an early morning class, and they have a part-time job that keeps them out late, and they just don't want to get up for that. So but that's probably one of the main differences that I found, that people here have this idea that the education system in Japan in general has a very high I guess, drive to succeed in the academic world, which they do, but it's not exactly as it appears in the media that we kind of have an idea about here. So
it's probably not good, but I think I take some comfort in the fact that 8 o'clock classes are difficult no matter where you are.
Oh, yeah. And as teachers, I always tell my students, do you think I like being here at 8 o'clock in the morning? I mean, I certainly would rather be home drinking my coffee and reading my morning paper. So if I have to be here, you have to be here. So
take me back 20 years. I believe one of the words you used was an adventure when you made the first trip.
Well,
why did it become home?
You know, it's interesting because I can even go back 30 years. That was my first experience in Japan.
Oh, even before.
Yes. In 1979, actually, as a Shelbyville High School junior, I went to Japan on a 2-month exchange. And the way that came about was quite interesting. I'd taken Spanish with Mr. Rice at Shelbyville High School since I was a freshman, and Spanish was my second language, and I had every intention of continuing that into university. So, of course, I wanted to go to a Spanish-speaking country for a summer exchange. Why, I don't know. I was so intent on living overseas. My family, we'd never traveled overseas. They kind of looked at me askance, like, well, what do they have over there that we don't have here? Why do you want to live overseas? It's something that's always been a part of me, though. I've always befriended all the exchange students who came to Shelbyville High School, would come to the house, and I was always friends with them. But in 1979, I, of course, applied to go to a Spanish-speaking country, and the coordinators of Youth for Understanding, YFU at that time, the Polikoffs, they said, Todd, we're sorry, but that program's closed. There's just too many students who want to go to Spain. Well, I was, of course, heartbroken and disappointed, but Jackie Polikoff, Mrs. Polikoff, said, have you thought about Japan? And actually, I hadn't. Mm-hmm. I thought, Japan? I don't speak Japanese. I don't know anything about Japan. So I went to the Shelbyville Library and got some books on Japan. And the more I read, I thought, wow, now this is a very interesting culture, something that I had not even entertained the idea. So I guess it's synchronicity in the sense that the Spain program was closed, and she suggested that I might think about it. I did. The Lilly Endowment gave me a nice little scholarship, so I was on my way. So I lived near Tokyo that first time, which is, it was called Hino, which is near Hachioji, and it's in the Tokyo area. So being a 17-year-old country bumpkin from Indiana, going off to the big city by myself, but I was fearless. I was so excited to be able to go there. But that was my first experience in Japan, and I spent 2 months there. And then during that 2 months, the family I lived with had a son, June, who was coming to the United States on the same program, but he was going to be here for a year. And so my family then hosted him. I called home, said, Mom, Dad, I have a favor. And they said, what? And I didn't know how they would react, actually. I said, June, my host brother, is coming, and he's been assigned to Ohio, but he'd like to come and stay with our family for a year. Is that okay? Which is a big commitment, an entire year to have a foreign and immediate. Yes, we'll do it. What do we have to do? So that was actually the first point where my whole family became Japanophiles through me, because of course, when June came and spent a year with my family, everyone loved him, and he just fit in perfectly. And his family came and visited us, and they flew June and I to New York, and I got to see New York City for the first time again. You know, I'm here 17, 18 years old, and it just was something that I never imagined I'd ever be able to do. Since then, of course, I've been so blessed to be able to travel so much and to see so many places and live in so many different places besides Japan and the United States. But that was my first experience. And then, of course, when I went to Purdue as an undergraduate, they didn't have any Japanese programs. At that point, it was, of course, Russian. The Cold War was such a big deal, and the Japanese economic miracle was developing, but we kind of missed the boat on that as far as getting people ready for the Japanese language and culture and history and studies. So I continued with my Spanish and had the opportunity to spend a junior year abroad. I did get to Spain finally and spent my junior year abroad there, and loved it. I loved Europe. I loved living in Spain. I loved traveling around Europe. It was just a wonderful experience. And
had you retained Mr. Rice's Spanish
touch
at
absolutely.
that point? Okay.
And it's interesting because to this day, I utilize a lot of the techniques that he used in his language classes with us, basically bribing students to participate. And I use that today, and I think of him so often. And we're in touch by email from time to time.
Good.
Because he certainly made a huge impact on my education and, of course, my teaching style. So I certainly appreciate him very much.